The Special Education Alliance is excited to bring you our speaker tonight, Chris Coberline, Project Consultant, MCIU. Chris provides professional development and technical assistance to school districts in Montgomery County in the areas of secondary transition, IEP writing, and parent training and resource expos. In addition to these roles, he also helps coordinate the Montgomery County Transition Coordinating Council and serves as a consultant to Monco Works Now, a youth workforce provider. All right, and there you are, Chris. Welcome.
All right, Reba and Sandy. And I would also like to just, we have Nikki, who is from Methacton, who's the transition coordinator for the Methacton Area School District, who's joining us as well. And I'm really excited about that because she's one of the partners, and we work together on things throughout some of the initiatives as it relates to transition. First of all, I would like to take time out to thank everybody who's taking time out of their schedule to join us on this night. As some of you know, one, I'm also not just a professional who works with individuals and students with disabilities, but I'm also a parent of a child with a disability who's gone through the transition process. So some of the things that I look at and I try to bring from a perspective are also that lens too. What we're going to be talking tonight is unlocking the doors to success. We're going to be looking at transition grids and what goes into that, into the buildup of that. I'm also going to be looking at trying to answer some of the questions that were pre-populated from the registration survey as well. In regards to, I will be sharing a PowerPoint at the end, and I will be sending to Sandy and Reba some different the PowerPoint in a PDF file, and also some different handouts as well at the end of the meeting so that they can send out and distribute. So as we begin today, I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to be talking about, like I said, unlocking the door to success. IEP transition grids. We're going to be looking at some of those areas related to education, training, employment, and independent living. I covered the meeting norms. If you have questions, please place them in the chat box, and we'll try to answer some of them as we go along. First and foremost, I usually like to start my questions and my presentations with this slide, especially when we're talking about transition. Life is a highway. As we look at the picture of this highway, sometimes life is straight ahead, sometimes there's curves, sometimes there's points in the road that we have to sort of stop and, look at the view. Sometimes as we look at that view, we get to see what's out there in the great ocean. As we look at that ocean, that's what we're really looking at as we prepare for life. School is a relatively small portion of a student's time in school. So as we talk about transition and preparing for transition, the rest of their future is ahead of them. Sometimes for some students, for some individuals, not just with disabilities, but just in general, as we look at curves, sometimes there's curves in the road as well. As we look at life and why transition becomes important, sometimes we, face those curvy streets. Sometimes we look at different ways. When we talk about transition, often in times there's more than one way. There's different options for different people, for different families, for different students. And as I talk about that, the way we navigate life, for everyone, including people with disabilities, the way we navigate life is highly individualized. In life, people may enter the stages on the road of life at different points with different strengths, with different needs, and with different resources. Some people may navigate it like the German Autobahn, driving full speed ahead. Others might choose a path or a route that's less traveled, may have a few bumps, but has an incredible view, whether on the road, by sea, or by climbing a mountain. And I can say, and I look at this, from my own personal experience, I had a twin brother, born 7 minutes apart. And within our own lives, within our own identities, our own talents, our own skills, we took very different career paths. My path was as an educator. His path was, as a guy who worked in a factory, a blue collar guy who, after work, went out and, rode a four-wheeler, worked on his pickup truck, did those things, did a lot of great things, was able to remodel his own home. Me, on the other hand, you give me a hammer and a nail. I've gotten better, thankfully, because of Google, but that's home improvement's just not my thing. So we all have our different talents and skills. And that's why in so many ways, as we look at transition, it's about developing a plan. As we look at this, I show this picture. This is Mount Washington in New Hampshire. As we look at it, there's different ways to navigate it. Some people might take a train. Some people might have that car bumper stick where you see the van. This van climbed Mount Washington. Some people might choose to take the hike up Mount Washington. Me, at this stage in my life, I will be one of those people who is either taking that rail car or a van that has that bumper sticker that this car climbed Mount Washington. So as we look at that, that's one of the big things when we talk about secondary transition. It's really about developing a plan based on a coordinated set of activities. So what is secondary transition? That coordinated set of activities, results-oriented process, looking at improving academic and functional achievement. And as we look at that, looking at education, training, independent living, and employment. The why of transition planning and why it's so important. It makes education and training, employment, and independent living accessible to students with disabilities and their families. Help students, families think about the future and jointly plan with school and supporting agencies. As we look at that transition, as we look at envisioning the future, as we look at charting the future, it's really important that we have a plan. And some of the things I'm going to talk about in terms of sort of from a legal perspective, from a financial perspective, but there are so many things that we have to consider, that we have to look at to really help our children prepare for the future, especially our sons and daughters or our children with disabilities. As we look at the transition process, it should be a student-centered process. We want to look at the student's strengths, their preference, their interests, their needs, their hopes, and their dreams. We need it to be a coordinated effort between school, between families, between the student as that driver, between the community and the various agencies that exist in the community. We want it to be a result-oriented process. As we go through transition planning, we will want it to lead to a process that ultimately ends up in a positive outcome. As we look at transition, this is one of the most important things. Who is the lead navigator? In high school, a lot of times it typically tends to be parents, guardians, teachers, counselors, other staff members, other family members. As we prepare a student for secondary transition or to those post-secondary world, whether it's either education and training, whether it's employment, whether it's independent living, the student becomes the navigator. And other presentations you might hear, they become the driver. We need them to begin to the fullest extent of their ability possible, take the reins to lead. And it goes a lot back to hearing, their hopes and their dreams. And this goes with different things that we'll talk about in a few slides down the road. You're going to hear me talk about some different terms. Entitlement, eligibility are some of those terms. But as we look in that post-secondary life, the student's the navigator, the student's the driver. As we look within helping them become that navigator, helping them become that driver, One of the things that we have to help them prepare to do and understand is that at times life's about sometimes going through and experiencing struggle and understanding that struggle is not always a bad thing. Um, one of the, and I'm a father of three, and one of the conversations that I've had not only with my son who's 24, who happens to have a disability, but also with, I'm blessed with two twin daughters who are 14, is that it's not a bad thing to struggle in life. It's not a bad thing to experience it, that there's a difference at times between struggle and failure. And one of the things that we really want to help some of our students, in this case, our children, do as they experience and they begin to envision life, is understanding that sometimes struggling is okay. It's a necessary step that we all go through in life. But what we want to do with that struggle and prepare them for is we want to make it productive. Some of our students, when they engage in struggle, we might hear things, I can't. In the case of my twin daughters, when it comes to cleaning their rooms, procrastinate. Sometimes for some of our individuals and students with disabilities, it's when they're not sure of what to do or they're struggling, not letting anyone know that they need help, not trying. When they see something that they think they might struggle with, they might not do anything. So we want to take that struggle and we want to make it productive. We want to encourage them at all times to try. One of the things that we want to really have them to look at, to begin to think about, is identifying resources or tools that can help them. An example, and I relate it to my experiences. I cannot do, or if you asked me about home repair 10 years ago, I'd be like, I've got to find someone for that. Ever since discovering the power of Google with regards to home repair, I've gotten much better. Has it taken me a little longer to do some of the things around the house? Yes. Has it saved me a lot of energy and effort from having to hire time and money a contractor? Yes. Some of those things I've taken on. I've identified, or I've asked a peer or a friend who might have gone through a similar home improvement project. So for some of our students, it's looking at the tools that they have at their disposal. Our students today have a lot of tools within the power of their hands that I call, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's a computer, whether it's a tablet. There's a lot of tools that are readily available that can assist and help them. It allows them to look at developing options and analyzing alternatives sometimes. Allows them to help them develop a plan. And ultimately, if they've carried out and they've done everything else, to ask for help. So when we talk about some of the things, as we help our sons, our daughters, our children, in some cases, if for some people who might be on the line, if it's our grandchildren as well, it's encouraging that struggle, but we want to really make it productive. And another example for me is I had one of my daughters came home and she got a 65 on a math test. She was afraid to tell me, you're going to yell, you're going to ground. No. What did you learn? And as we went through that, she learned, well, I can go here in school for peer tutoring because geometry seems a little bit harder than algebra. And I said, and that's quite common, especially with the brain in the family that we live in, because I can tell you math's not my favorite subject. My daughters are much better. But as she prepared the next time, she realized that struggle. She identified things. I can ask a peer, I can ask a friend, I can form a study group. And that was one of the things I started to see as finals or midterms time has come up in the high school is all of a sudden, Dad, can we go out for pizza and study? Awesome, sure. So she's gone through that struggle with geometry in her 9th grade year, realized it, has developed a plan, and has put that in place. One of the things that I saw in some of the questions regarding things, what can we do now for some of our children who are going to be going to college? One of the things that I often encourage, and I titled this slide "From an Aid with an E to an Aid with a D," is to really foster and encourage independence to the fullest degree possible. We want to focus on shifting the intensity of supports from a person, a parent, a teacher, a service provider, a paraprofessional, to accommodations, environmental adaptations, or other natural supports within that community or within that environment that the student might be in. Example of this, instead of me waking, and it's a personal example, when my son first started middle school, he went from elementary school where he didn't go to school till almost 9 o'clock. Middle school came around, he had to be up by about 6:15. It was, as probably some of you know, it was a pretty vicious type of thing, going from, not having to get up till about 8 o'clock to all of a sudden, hey, you've got to be up bright and early at 6:15. When we started out, it did not go well with me or my wife going in and waking him up. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to get up. So we shifted that responsibility. All of a sudden, he started getting up to a tablet. Eventually, it became later on in his high school years a cell phone, but he got to pick a song. He got to pick, some cases, he set it to like this funny movie jingles to get up to. But we shifted that responsibility. Once we shifted some of that responsibility and created and fostered that independence about waking up early, we saw a lot less behaviors within our own personal interactions with. So as we go from that A to with an E to a D, within the classroom, what it might look like is, instead of the student asking a paraprofessional for assistance, utilizing a tool or asking a peer. And what we mean by that is identifying the tools. If it's a word, I'm not saying the dictionary or a math problem, there's a lot of different apps and tools available on the tablets or the computers that they might use. When they're asking their friend, it's not all the time just asking for the answer, but it's, how can I solve this problem? Or how can I get assistance from the peer sometimes? From a parent-teacher lens, for a lot of our students with disabilities, it's organization, helping them organize, whether it's in the morning or getting off to school or organizing things in their room, rather than us doing it for them or taking a great deal of the ownership for their organization. It's having them or teaching them to utilize organizational tools and strategies, whether it's having different colored, and in the case of some of the students that I've worked with, from an executive skills, having different colored folders or binders for their work. Having a folder, beginning in elementary school all the way up to high school, what needs to come home, what needs to be returned to school. In other scenarios and situations, creating a checklist of things that they need to do each day to be organized. So that's one of the things that, especially if our students, and it doesn't matter if they're college bound or if they're going to work, it's really one of the things that overall that we want to do is we want to shift some of that responsibility from a person, because a person's not always going to be there, or a person's not always going to be funded. But if we can shift it to supports in a natural environment, shifting it to teaching them to request assistance from a coworker, teaching them to, look at different ways, different tools through apps. There's so many different things where we're shifting that responsibility to foster and create independence. And one of the reasons why we want to look at that, I'm going to go over some vocabulary terms that are really, really important from a transition perspective, a transition lens. As we look at right now, your children, your son or daughter, are in what we call entitlement programs, school-age services. Within school-age services, students are entitled to receive special education services. Essentially, within the entitlement program, if there's services that they might need from an educational perspective, it's the responsibility of the school district to help orchestrate and provide that service in the delivery. And what that might look like, students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, specially designed instruction with related services as part of the IEP, and also transition services in preparation for further education, employment, and independent living. Once a student exits special education, they exit the entitlement program. So once a student exits school, they become involved in the eligibility world. Eligibility for services and supports is determined through requirements of outside agencies outside of the school system. Individuals may qualify for services. Services are not guaranteed. It is the individual, parent, guardian's responsibility to help the student obtain services. And this is, in many cases, this is where if we look at one of the activities that we want to help students go through and be prepared for, we want to have a student begin to become self-determined, to begin to self-advocate for themselves. Because it's really, really important that their voices are heard. This is especially important for students who are going to college and are going to be requesting accommodations. And this is something I'll talk a little bit about further in the presentation. It's the voice of the student. The student has the choice whether they want to seek support through the Office of Disability Services. There's no child find activity on a college campus. We can help the student bring attention to that, but ultimately they're the ones who make that choice. As we look at through additionally within the eligibility world, services aren't necessarily guaranteed. And this is a tough one. And I can say, even through a personal lens, they can qualify for services, they can be eligible for services, but if there's not money to provide for that service, if there's not funding to provide for that service, if there's not a person to provide that service. And that's one of the biggest things right now for some of our families with disabilities is right now we can have money, we can have qualification for service, but for some things right now, there's not a person to provide that service or there's waiting lists. So that's one of the shifts to really understand as we go from entitlement to eligibility is within that. And that's one of the things as we talk about and look at activities is the more that we can have less resilience on a person and more to that natural supports, the greater off we're going to be in fostering independence, which will lead to greater outcomes, which we'll talk about more as we develop those transition goals, which are part of the transition grids that we'll talk about a little bit later as well. Again, I can't say enough about the importance and the role of self-advocacy. A student has to be able to self-advocate. They also have to, and with self-advocacy, one of the things that becomes really important is disability disclosure. Students have to know that they have to have a disability. With some students and with some families that I've worked with throughout my 25 years in education, in the area of special education, some students don't know that they have a disability or they don't know what their disability is. And that's going to set them back a little bit because for a lot of things, especially in the eligibility world, you have to know what your disability is because you're going to have to provide documentation of such disability. And whether it's an employment and requesting job accommodations, whether it's going to college and requesting accommodations from an academic setting. Accommodations. There's two other terms that we're going to talk about just from a vocabulary standpoint. These are based on just some of the questions that came in, especially as we're leading to college and post-secondary outcomes as part of activities. We want to know what the differences are between accommodations and modifications. Accommodations are adaptations or changes to educational environments and practices designed to help students overcome challenges presented by their disability. Common adaptations, format, assistive technologies, testing accommodations. The key here is they're not changing the outcome. They're not changing what the student's responsible for. They're changing how the student might learn it or access that knowledge, but they're not changing the outcome. What we're looking at next is modifications. Modifications are adaptations that change what students learn and are used with students who require more support or adjustments than accommodations can provide. This next sentence, whereas accommodations level the playing field or encourage or create that access, modifications change the playing field. Sample modifications that we often might see in a student's IEP: alternative assignments, shorter tests, fewer homework questions, or substitutions. Unlike accommodations, modifications do the following. They do change the expectations for the learning. They do reduce the requirements in a lot of cases of the task. So for students who are college bound, it's really important that we understand that difference. When we look at colleges, and I'll talk about this too, when we get to the post-secondary education and training, colleges are really only looking at accommodations. They're not looking at modifications. So it's really important as we get into those middle and high school IEPs, we start looking at that specially designed instruction, and we start looking at what modifications that we can slowly begin to fade away, and start to effort to prepare a student for that post-secondary setting. And this can be part of that activity as we look at things, because it leads to fading away that support from an aid with an E to fading that support to an aid with a D, and making the students increasing, fostering their ownership of their academic material. And this is one of the big things. Like I said, I will cover it more when we talk about in post-secondary education and training, but it's really one of the key and crucial elements when we talk about secondary transition. I'm just going to see if we have any questions.
Chris, the only one that I see so far is, do you start the transition discussion at middle school?
Okay. When we talk about transition, transition in the state of Pennsylvania is required to begin by the age of 14. The other part of the wording in the law is if it's needed earlier, it can begin earlier. However, one of the things, some of the people who know me and who've heard me speak before, yes, from a lifespan, from a school perspective, transition begins at 14. But in many cases for us as parents of children with disabilities, I view transition beginning very early on. In essence, when my wife and I had our son, his transition plan began essentially at age 5. And people look at me and they're like, what do you mean? I said, transition might not officially begin for him from a school perspective or from an IDA requirement, but when we bought our first home, we bought our house near a bus stop, not knowing in terms of public transportation, or not knowing in terms of if he was ever going to be able to drive. At least there would be the option for public transportation. In terms of looking at the idea of transition in elementary school, some of the foundational skills that you need for transition are learned early on. So some people get in the mindset that it begins at 14, and from an IEP perspective, it might legally or legally does. But from as a parent to parent here, I encourage transition to begin early on in terms of how we're charting the lifespan. Whether it's the academic skills, in terms of, for some of our looking at from our roles and responsibility as parents, savings accounts and those type of things. Some of the decisions that we make early on in regards to education or socialization or opportunities, the expectations or presuming competence are major crucial elements of transition planning as well. So although legally it begins at 14, for us as parents, the role of transition begins early on in life. I hope that answers that question, but yeah, it should, by the time a student turns 13, by the time a student's 13 turning 14 during the course of that IEP or transition planning should begin. For some of our students with more significant needs, especially with blind or visual impairments, or severe medical needs, sometimes we have to look at early on. We encourage it because what we want to start doing is making those relationships and connections with, for example, the Office of Developmental Programs as well. Sandy, anything that you want to add from a parent lens there, because you've been doing a transition or a preparation for transition for a long time too.
I don't have anything to add, but when I saw the question, I thought it was directed to me, so I answered it privately, and you gave the same answer, so I'm proud of myself.
All right. All right. As we come back, as we talk about moving forward, charting the life course, transition, really looking at, unlocking those doors to success, looking at the transition grade as well. It's really a partnership. A partnership between the family and the school district, a partnership between the family, school district, and community. It's a partnership between the student and the school district in many ways. It's also a partnership between us as parents and our children as well. So it's an all-around partner. We've got a lot of different people who are going to be involved and become part of that IEP meeting. So as we look at it, it becomes a partnership. As we look at preparing for life, the reason why it's become such imperative that it's a partnership, because there's so much that goes on. School, education, finances, careers, work-life balance, recreation, quality of life, employment, wealth, well-being, education, transportation. And to sort of go to that other question about when, and it sort of beat it in before the slide came up even, and this slide will show sort of that when does transition begin? Early on in life. Questions to think about. How many times does your children outside of school transportation utilize public transportation, if it's available? How many times per week does your child participate in making a snack, meal, etc.? What activities does your child participate in at school, home, or in the community that provide experiences related to developing employability skills? These are all things that can begin early on. It doesn't, if we wait to middle school, if we wait to high school, and this is some of the things that some people have heard me speak on at prior educational conferences, and I recently spoke in November on one, we're already too late. So the more things that we can encourage our children to do and get involved in, whether at home, whether at the community or in school, learning those things, whether it's public transportation, participation in meal prep, chores, responsibilities at home. We really want them to take ownership and be a part of those things and to be able to participate to the fullest degree of their ability possible. As we look at really transition planning, we look at, developing transition activities. One of the things that I really want you to think about when we look at the process of transition and the time that a student has in school in the secondary setting. For a student who's in high school and during the course of their high school year, typically they're going to have between their first year and their senior year about 990 hours of instructional time per year. For students who don't exit special education, we're going to add additional time based on an IEP team decision. In all reality, that's not a whole lot of time. So when we start thinking about transition, and the reason why I say that it's not a whole lot of time, think about all the things that during the student's instructional school day that they're doing. They have math, reading, writing, or depending on the grade, written communication classes sometimes at the high school, phys ed, electives, lunch, Some days for some, there might be different field trips. As they get older, there might be community-based instruction or tech schools. So in that 990 hours, which is over, give or take, about 180 days of school a year, a student's pretty busy with a lot of different things. So as we start planning, as we start thinking about transition, one of the things that is, as I talk to you here tonight, that I really want you to begin to think about as it relates to transition and what we're looking at doing through the IEP process, we have to begin to prioritize and prioritizing and assuming responsibilities. During the school day, what are the activities that can be focused on the school day? What are the biggest things that the school day will provide that biggest bang for their buck? What are the activities that can be focused on while the student is at home or in the community? What are the activities that can be worked on collaboratively with the student between home and school or school and home? And what I'm going to show you sort of what I mean by this. Example, high school student. This high school student happens to have a name. His name is Trent. He is my son. This is one of the things that sort of we looked at doing, my wife and I, when my son was in school. Academic instruction. That was obviously, he went to school for that instruction, reading, and math. At home, we looked on some of those activities that supported that academic instruction. Homework, studying habits. This is a really big one for a lot of our kids today. A lot of our kids today don't know how to study. And this is for anybody who's sending a kid off or kids going off to college. Mom, Dad, I'm going into my room. You know, it's gone over the 1980s and the early 90s when I grew up, where, you know, you could tell if a kid was banging, you know, listening out to their music, watching TV. It's hard now because now they have headphones in. So, but a lot of our kids don't know how to study. They go in, they study on their bed. That's not productive studying in a lot of ways. Sometimes what we have to do is teach them, whether it's a room in their house, whether it's the dining room table, a room, in some cases, maybe an extra or spare bedroom, an office space or den. You know, we really sometimes, we have to teach studying habits. So then for us, it was, you know, we created, you know, for him a separate space outside of his room because his room was way too, you know, oh, I can get off distracted. So we looked at places within our home that were free from distraction to create that study room environment. Right? Collaboratively, those executive skills, organization, planning. We didn't want to teach one thing at home. Well, they were teaching another system at school. So we worked collaboratively on sort of those systems for organization and planning. As part of his transition plan, participation in the family and consumer science class. So he did some of those focus. We took the care and the responsibility for some of the things such as laundry and cleaning and responsibilities. Collaboratively, he learned in the classroom how to look at a lot of the healthy living, meal prep. But in order to begin and to continue to foster that, those are things that we also worked on at home. School. One of the biggest things that for some of our individuals with disabilities, school he participated in work-based learning. For him at that point, it was one of the things that was, and I still believe to this day, is one of the biggest benefits that we ensured that he had as part of his transition plan, as part of an activity. Learning how to work, you know, spending that time in different settings, learning some of those critical skills that are on while you're at work. One of the big things early on for him in his first experiences was learning that if we're at work for an hour and a half, it's work for an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's not, here's your checklist of 5 or 6 things, and then you're done. You know, your employer is not going to pay you just because you did 5 or 6 things. In this case, where he was learning as part of a work-based learning experience, the expectation is that if you get to work at 9, you're working till 10:30. Within that, at home, then working with the school and the other teams, we worked on applications and community applications for employment. The school district helped us with the collaboration with OVR and some of the early reach activity. And that's really one of the things as we start developing this and as we begin to think about transition activities and services, what are the things that we really need to identify that within that school environment that we can have or want to discuss as part of the IEP process, to discuss with the school to take ownership of and help support us with within that context of the school environment. What are the things that we can do at home? Because again, we're limited by time. It doesn't seem that way, but once a student enters the transition arena, in so many ways, the clock starts ticking and time always subtracts and never gets added. And then looking at things and how, so that we're working collaboratively as well. So those are different things. And you look at other things, like from a transition activities, driver's ed. One of the things you'll hear me talk a lot is about transportation as well. In our district, they had a driver's ed theory class, which was great. I recommend this for everyone. The best decision I ever made, and if your son or daughter is going to drive, I private paid a driving school. It was the best $600 I ever spent. They trained him for 6 hours. They took him through the road course. They did that. I tried to take him about 3 times, my son, and it was probably going to be the end of our relationship. And it was, the people who do it, those driving school instructors, they do a very good job. Let them do it. It was really one of the best things that I can say we've ever done. In terms of other things, self-determination is a big thing, reinforcing that. Looking at other things here is, so really thinking your mind, school, home, collaboratively together. How do we prioritize then? Assessment can be a great tool for that. Assessment, process of gathering information relevant to planning, evaluating, or making decisions. Whether it's academic, transition, career, vocational, behavioral, social, gathered from multiple pieces and places over time. Areas of assessment: academic skills, reading, writing, math, employability skills, functional skills, critical skills, self-determination, persistence, problem solving, all those job-related skills that build in there as well. So we will want to see, because again, we have a limited window of time. We want to assess a student's strengths. We want to assess their preferences. We want to assess their interests, so that we can start to begin to chart that plan. Within that, we want to look at the things that really they might need to work on through their needs. And then we can look at, through that IEP, what are the things that we need to develop as services or activities, in which I'll define later as well, in effort to support their goals for a post-secondary life. Different types of assessments: formal, informal, values, learning styles, aptitudes, abilities, skills, and transferable skills, interests. When we start talking early on, especially early on in the transition process, we're going to be looking at those things such as interests and preferences. By the time we get students to be on the verge of exiting special education services through different experiences, we want to look at assessments that are going to be more, whether it's school related in terms of readiness for college or work skill and readiness for work. So it's sort of going to be that profile over time. We're going to start out interests, learning style, to really become much more formal, trying to look at some of that work data, what type of environment, what type of skills, what type of environment does a student like to work in. Of note about work environment when we assess work environment. Since COVID of March of 2020, things are changing at a rapid pace. For some of our individuals and students with disabilities, we not only have to look at and think as we plan for the future about work that it's going to be in a physical space in terms of a physical community environment, But one of the great things for some people with disabilities, and I'm not saying COVID's created anything great, but the opportunities to work at home or hybrid or virtual work has really opened up a number of doors for individuals with disabilities. Now for some of our individuals with disabilities, they can work at home, and now we don't have to look at a barrier such as things related to transportation. Now we don't have to look at a barrier that might be related to a huge modification of a work area. So for some people, as we look at things, we also have to understand that now we might have to think about, plan, and assess potential of either a work at home situation, a hybrid space, a virtual space, because jobs now are just in a different area. So that's something to consider as well. I see that there's something through the chat box.
Chris, I have a private question for you on assessments. Are there certain assessments that should be done at certain ages, and how early can you start getting those assessments? Is there a schedule of assessments that parents can access to be educated on what's available?
In terms of, there's different things with different spans. The hard part with some of the things, generally when we look at early on, especially in, like, say, for example, starting in middle school, you're going to look at your interest, your preference assessments. You might start looking at learning style. As you go towards high school, further in high school, that's where you're going to look at some of your assessments that might look at related to a student's work or a career and college readiness. Assessments can also mean different things depending on disability classification as well. For example, students who are blind or visually impaired, their assessment process and the assessments they use, there's what they call the expanded core curriculum, is going to look different. There's also, in regards to depending on their needs. So there's a variety of tools and measures that are available within the Methacton School District. Some of the different tools that the district uses. There's a tool, and Nikki, you can correct me if I'm wrong. One of the set of measures a lot of the schools use. Oh, Nikki, you're going to have to help me. Is it Naviance or Smart Futures? In fact, I work with 22.
We use Naviance.
So Naviance is one, and it has a lot of things that are involved: skills, interest, preference, different things. There's different timelines. One of the things that I really like to point out when we talk about college and career readiness and assessment is it's not just a special education thing in the state of Pennsylvania anymore. Each district has what they call a guidance and career counseling plan. So there's also activities that are done, and we covered this, Sandy, what, about a year ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, when we talked about some of the things that are also being done in the regular education environment as well, that are being brought into from an assessment point of view as well. Assessment could also be those academic things. Some of our things that are also incorporated as part of our ER reevaluation reports include assessments that might be beneficial to the transition process as well. I did see Karen. How are you today? I saw, can you share what you know about opportunity to turn down? Karen, probably with the situation with that, one of the things that we, Karen, that's going to be a whole nother meeting probably. In terms of resources, I think one of the things in that situation is, one, we want to look at, I believe if you have a supports coordinator, we want to look at that and to reach out to them. In terms of some of the resources, we also want to look at their I'm down by OVR, the place close, to see in terms of in terms of looking at, one would be to reach out to your supports coordinator to see what in terms of the community habilitation providers are looking at. With, and the reason I would say that is because one of the areas that you could look at is through a customized employment lens for it, which would go through the supports coordinator and your waiver funding. An example would be to look at the discovery process as well for that. So I know I just covered a lot of information in that. So for a student who's been turned down by OVR, in summary, I'm going to re-summarize it. Contact your supports coordinator. One thing to look at would be to look at something like the discovery process, to look at something related to customized employment. I hope that answers that question.
Who drives the discovery process, Chris?
There's different people who are trained in the discovery process by Mark Gold and Associates. The ARC Alliance right there in Collegeville used to have somebody. Sandy Sharon Jones used to, I believe, at one point in time, might have been trained in it. I can't say now if the ARC Alliance does or not, but I would reach out to your supports coordinator about that, regarding that. So again, assessment, some of the things help students answer unique talents. What do I want to do? What are some of life's demands that I can meet now? What are the main barriers to getting what I want from school and my community? Options. Ensuring that students are involved, they develop an understanding, discuss their strengths, abilities, and needs for a long-range vision. Looking at time management, studying social skills, personal information, identifying their disability, knowing, how to access their records, families, strengths, interests, identifying those struggles. We know more about our children's and some of the things that go into some of those transition planning, looking at sort of the gap. One tool and this tool can be a pretty useful tool, especially for us as parents, is the Charting the Life course. It's a series of tools that can be really used in conjunction as part of the transition process, especially when you're working with your transition, not your supports coordinator. School has a part of it. We can work collaboratively and sort of begin to establish sort of that mission and that vision. It will also, some of the benefits, the nice things with sort of the life course series and the tools, as it begins to help us plan for that individual service plan as students exit special education as well. Some of those things in terms of looking what a day might look like, what a week might look like, what supports are available, family, home, community as well. So it can be a really great tool as part of that assessment process for some individuals and their families as well. What are our post-secondary goals? When I say post-secondary goals, these are goals. These are going to be our goal areas of post-secondary education and training, employment, independent living. These aren't our measurable annual IEP goals, but these are what's the dream, what are the dreams for, in this case, our sons or daughters or children as they exit school as it relates to those areas. So in order to develop these post-secondary goals, we're going to look at assessment. They're not the same thing as the measurable annual IEP goals or events occurring during school. So these are things that are going to occur after they graduate or exit special education services. We want them to reflect those statements. Post-secondary goal areas, 3 of them that we're going to look at as part of that transition grid. Post-secondary education and training, employment, and independent living. Some people in some training put on might see this as community participation. So just note that's what we're talking about here. When from an IEP lens, you see independent living, it's that extension of community participation that some people talk about as well. Courses of study. One of the first things that we look at when we talk about a transition grid, and that you'll see, and this is where sort of after we've developed those goal statements, and I'm sort of covering a couple things first, and this is one of them. Courses of studies is first. Do the transition services include a course of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet their post-secondary goal? So this is what we're doing. We're planning what courses that the student will take. A student's courses of study refers to the courses and experiences that help him or her achieve their goals. So we want to select the right courses. We want to select courses that are aligned with their post-secondary goals. So if they're looking to follow and they have a post-secondary goal of attending college, we want to select those courses that might follow that track. If a student has a goal to receive on-the-job training in a particular area, and they're looking at going to North Monco, we're going to look at, assisting them in the application and the process of applying to North Monco and looking at one of the career and technical educational training programs at North Monco. It supports academic and functional achievement, promotes graduation by meeting district standards. I talked about looking at that program of study at the Career and Tech Center. Some of our common programs of study at the Tech Center could be building trades, computer networking and different computer courses, computer programs, culinary, health sciences. Some of the different tech schools in the area have different programs. So those are some of the more common ones that we see across the board. The reason one of the things that I have at the end in bold, wants versus needs, when I talk about courses of study, one of the things that sometimes, especially at the high school, typically at the middle school, you have less control over the classes, but you have more control at the high school level, especially in the area of electives. When we talk about transition, that we want to look at is we want to select the courses that follow that coordinated set of activities that lead to the student post-secondary goals. And the reason I say this, if we look at sort of our guidance counseling, the different courses of study, there's a lot of different courses of studies, a lot of different classes that are available, a lot of different electives for a student to take. But sometimes what we have to get them focusing on is the ones that are going to align with that outcome. So, and here are some of the different circumstances that I'll talk about. You have a student who has a post-secondary goal of college. They only have room in their class, one last class to decide. They have the opportunity in their 12th grade year, the rest of their schedule's filled out. They want to go to college and they have a choice. They can do yearbook or they can do math. A want versus a need. In a lot of places, and I can't remember, Nikki, can you help me? Is math a required senior course or is it 3 years in Methacton?
It's 3 years, but then there's also the additional year of a STEM credit. So math could fill that 4th year.
So what I tell a lot of students and families with disabilities, if college is their goal, they should be taking some sort of math class in their senior year. And some students, and my son tried to pull this, but I really like this class. I want to take this. And it sounds really interesting. I did my 3 years in math. Why are you making me take a math class? And the reason is, and what I explained to him is we want our students to be prepared to go into college and take those entrance exams so that they place out of basic 101 or basic, not 101 math, so that they don't get placed into basic math. Because if a student's placed into a basic or remedial math at a college or university setting, and even at Montgomery Community College, it's a class that they don't get credit for. It's a class that they have to pay for. So we don't want them to lose any math skills or any reading skills between the time during that course of that senior years, because there's that senioritis that even for our kids with disabilities can come into. Another example, for some of our, in some school districts, they might have a chance to participate in a skills remediation class, or it might be a type of math class that's called, or a reading class that sort of works on some of the skills. And they have an option of taking a study hall. If college is your goal, work on remediating those skills, because for a lot of our students, and I've seen personally 3 go through it, and I've seen others, maybe that study hall becomes 50% productive. So other things, study hall or participation in work-based learning, again, as an employment, if it fits in their schedule and they can, I'm a big advocate of participation in that work-based learning, and the evidence and the research will show and support that. Looking at independent living, this is one even where in my own case, I had one of my daughters this year, she got to select classes in 9th grade. Consumer finance in the district I live in, kids have to take a consumer or a personal finance. She wanted to take an art class. What do you want to do? Does it relate to art? No, but I like art. I want to be with my friends. Does it relate to your future and your occupation of what you want to do? Not really. And in terms of looking at those classes, because there's so much that they have the ability to sometimes take and track and pass, that's sometimes that we have to have those discussions, the wants versus the needs. And I understand different classes might have other opportunities or provide for social or other type of work for some of our goals for some kids, and that might be appropriate based on that team's decision. But it's something that sometimes when we're looking at that high school of courses of study, we have to really be careful with and really have them take a focused pathway so that they're not only fulfilling their high school requirements, but also they're getting the ability to add as much to their skill set as possible. We got a question from that. So now what we're going to talk about is the transition services and the activities. These are action steps that support the student's movement towards their post-secondary goal. These are things that are slated to occur during a period of the current IEP, which may occur across school year. When we look at the transition grid, each post-secondary area is going to contain services and activities. Services are specific activities that look to address skill deficits. These can be based on measurable annual goals and utilize progress monitoring to measure student performance. Example services, following 3-step directions, improve self-advocacy skills, reading skills, math skills, peer interaction, social skills, behavioral, things related to behavior. There's a reason why I led off with follow 3-step directions, looking at vocational tasks. An individual with a disability who has the ability to complete a 3-step vocational task or follow a 3-step direction has a greater likelihood of obtaining, maintaining employment, even for some of our students with the most significant needs. So that could be something where we're looking at as part of a work-based learning task or work-based learning service or goal. So these are things that are goal-based that we're collecting data on. Next are activities. These are events, information that help students achieve their goals. Activities don't need to be measurable. progress monitoring doesn't need to be collected. These are things that they might do throughout the IEP in different areas. A virtual tour of a job, or a virtual tour of a tech school program, or career portfolio, a job shadow, a senior project. For some of our students, it's, information or a meeting with OVR, or for some of our students, if they're involved with early reach services from OVR. So those are activities. I'm going to give more examples in each of the areas as the presentation goes on, and you'll have this presentation at the end as well. I'll be sending it to Sandy and Reba to send out. As we look at services and activities, especially in the areas of activities, one of the things that in order to help your child as part of transition planning, as part of the transition grid, begin to sort of rank the priorities. What activities can I help my child do at home? What activities might be better off being focused on in school? Again, what activities do we need specific collaboration between home and school on? And again, it comes down to time. What do I need during that instructional day? And in my personal case, one of the biggest things was that work-based learning experience. What don't I need focused on? And those are things as we generate and use our assessment data and have those IEP discussions. Those are some of the big things as we look at activities. We can't do everything within the course of an IEP during the course of a school day. So we have to really start to rank those priorities. What do we need from a service? What do we need from an activity standpoint that's going to provide that coordinated set of activities as part of transition planning? So as we look at post-secondary goal areas, when we look at the IEP template and the one that we get published through PD and patent, post-secondary education and training is first. Nikki and I have written lots of IEPs, and that's the way it's done. We look at post-secondary first. What I want you to do, and what I want to encourage you to do is I'm going to ask you to think about looking from a parent perspective. Think about employment first. And there's reasons why I'm going to ask you to think about employment first. And some of those reasons are, and this comes from a parent perspective. One, it allows the student to be the navigator. Ultimately, employment for most students is the ultimate outcome. PA is an employment first state. As we look at employment, what we're going to look at, and some of the things that Naviance and some other assessments can look at, we might identify a career cluster that a student wants to work in or has interest in. We can identify a career pathway. We can begin then to sort of filter into some of the jobs that they might look to do within that career pathway, which allows us as a team to focus on the education, training, and skills needed to pursue that career. It helps focus on the what in career preparation. Because so often what we see is students will identify, I think I want to go to this school. I want to go here. Or I heard that this is a really good school. Or, I'm going to be honest and open, for some of the kids that I went to high school. I'm going to go here because, it sounds really fun and I hear the nightlife's great. For some of our students with not just disabilities, but they look at schools, why do you want to go there? They have a good football team. My parents went there. My friend's going there. My girlfriend's going there. If we look at the cost of college anymore, when we're looking at tuitions that, if we go beyond our state schools that are going into $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, if we look at the sustainability and the resource and the allocation of that, college is an expensive proposition. Education can be an expensive proposition. So by looking at employment first, we're going to gear up the actual education, the training that's necessary for that career. And what we're finding out today and there's data to support this, is that we've got people who are overqualified for the jobs that they're actually in, because that's the job that's related to sort of sometimes the education and the training. So that's really one of the things from a parent perspective. Start thinking about the job, the career cluster, the pathway, and the job title or the associated titles. Look at your community, reflect on, especially looking at some of the places where you think that in terms of your son or daughter might want to live and the jobs that are available there, because ultimately that's going to be a huge part of post-secondary. I think that's one of the things that as we look at it, people focus on the education and the training, but we don't look at what they really want to do. And, you know, for some people who've gone to college and say, after 4 years, I really don't want to, I have no interest in this, despite having a degree in it. So by spending that time there and finding that job title, it's going to pay off in the long run. I'm going to stop. I see some questions coming in.
First one, what does PA is an employment first state mean?
It starts out that when we look at for outcomes for individuals, all individuals, that employment, including individuals with disabilities, employment should be a first step in the process, first option.
Is there a site? Oh, do you want to read them? Do you?
Oh, I'm looking at it now. There's actually a site, and I'll share it. I'll add it to the presentation before I send it. There's actually a website that has a list of, I think it's about 400 employers now that, in terms of looking at supporting and attempting to hire individuals with disabilities. Veteran owned, sort of along the lines of sort of that veteran owned type business, that type of thing, similar to that. I'll add that in terms of employers that are disability friendly, so to speak, in terms of supporting cultures, job accommodations, requests specifically. In terms of technical schools, at the high school level, Methacton sends students to North Montco. They can sometimes look at other technical schools depending on programs and space. There's also some different other programs that they can look at in terms of technical schools in post-secondary settings. One school that does wonders with students with disabilities is the Pennsylvania, not just students with disabilities, but a lot of individuals, is the Pennsylvania Institute of Technology. There's also, as part of OVR, there's the Hiram Andrews Center. The one thing with the Hiram Andrews Center is it's out in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. So for some people, you know, going all the way out towards Pittsburgh is a little far. For depending on students and their ability, another school is Thaddeus Stevens out in Lancaster that has some different trades as well. As part of that. But that's one of the things as an activity we can also be incorporated and begin to explore as part of that transition process. If we know a student has a particular interest, we can use that to sort of generate some of those training programs as well. Because for some of our technical and training schools, we can even look at some of the automotive programs that exist at a post-secondary level that are a year-long program. The community college has some work-based certification programs. Some of the programs are 6 months in nature as well. So there's a lot that's out there. What we can also use is some of those resources that we have, especially in our guidance counseling departments that have access to that knowledge based on a student's career, their assessments and their interest in terms of finding that education as well.
Chris, the name of the technical school, is that the PA Institute of Technology? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the Pennsylvania Institute of Technology is in Williamsport. One of the great things about the Pennsylvania Institute of Technology is it also has like these overnight residential summer camps for students in 10th to like 9th, 10th, and 11th grades to sort of give that mini college training experience as well. They've also done in the past like a 2 or 3 day camp for some of our students on the autism spectrum to give that sense of what that college experience might look and what it might feel for them as well, and if it's something to explore. But that Pennsylvania Institute of Technology is a really great program. But some of our community colleges also have some different programs in terms of especially technical programs. Montgomery County has some, Bucks County has some. I know it's a further hike up the road, but Lehigh Carbon Community College also has some workforce training programs as well. Northampton Community College has some programs as well. The one unique fact about Northampton Community College is there is a dorm. So for some individuals as well. Judy, in response to your question, what with no support for students with ID, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Do you mean in terms of like a post-secondary comprehensive transition program? Is that what you're talking about there?
No, I called them and because they have a disability center at Montgomery County Community College. And I'm thinking, oh, that's great. This would be something that, we could look at. And when I called them, they're basically saying, there's no assistance to help bridge or modify or support that student with special needs in their program, because they had a cooking program, like a culinary arts program, and there's no way that most of our children would be able to attend that because they don't have the support. So I don't know
So,
what the disability center does for them, but it wasn't going to support them attending Monco at all.
So in what we're looking at, and one of the things what you're talking about, and that's one of the things, and it's actually coming up in a few slides, what I'll talk about, is when we start looking at some college programs and college environments, it goes back to that term accommodation. They can accommodate things, extended test time, alternative test site, but colleges aren't bound to modify. They don't have to change what's being learned in terms of the outcome. They don't have to do a course substitution. They don't have to do half of a task list, so to speak. So that's what we run into when we look at some of those programs. They do have an Office of Disability Services. They do have different supportive services. So that's where, yes, we run into some of those things where some of our students with disabilities, when we look at specific colleges, that in terms of the level of support might not be there in terms of some of their programs. That's where what we're seeing now is we're seeing the rise in the number of what we call post-secondary comprehensive transition programs on college campuses to support students with intellectual disabilities and accessing the campus, but they are getting a certificate. They're not ending up with a degree. And that's the difference there. So they might audit a class, sometimes for a credit, sometimes not. They might take a vocational experience or complete a vocational experience on the campus, but they're not in a degree-seeking program. That's where you've seen the rise. The Grin and Mercy program, Arcadia has one, the SILS program. There's the Dream Partnership program. More and more schools are developing those programs for students with intellectual disabilities.
Right, but if you're thinking about employment first, and there's no avenue to do job training, and a technical school, for example, then it's kind of like you're saying, this is what you should be thinking about for your child, but there's no programs out there to support that for our children that are, that have, some with very significant special needs. So that's
Mhm.
what I was, that's what I'm very interested. I agree. I think about employment before college because, that's what's going to help them to be successful in their community.
And that's why as we look at some of the things through trying, one of the things that um, the Montgomery County Intermediate Units working on is to provide um, through a newer program that's hopefully going to come out in the next year, some different types of programs to support students with more complex needs, your students with ID, and learning some of the skills related to some of those technical skills, um, because it's a different type of program. So there's hopefully some things in the future there that in terms of to provide supports to students and families as well. In terms of, that's why as part of that process, for sometimes looking at some of those community habilitation providers that provide that support, or for some families, that's why some families choose to become their own supports brokers, to at least to try to hire staff who could fit in that training model for them as well. Sample employment goals, competitive employment, supported employment. Um, Supported employment is, that's looking at where we're going to be, have an outcome where a student might receive supports. The goal in a lot of cases is competitive employment, but in terms of supported employment, they're looking at supports with a job coach or a job coaching agency, or supports there. Customized employment, the difference is where we're looking at through an example of the discovery process, looking at customizing a job or an opportunity for job, depending on the unique strengths of a student, their interests, in terms of finding sometimes there's specific things that they might be really good at doing, or in terms of, or that they're able to do. An example of a customized deployment from years ago, and that would be looking at some of the greeters in some of the stores. If you looked at years ago, where in terms of, and this came around, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, where Walmart would used to have some of our individuals with disabilities be the greeter. And they eliminated that position because they couldn't lift 50 pounds or 40 pounds or do X, Y, and Z. Walmart used to employ a number of people as greeter who had even significant disabilities. And it was a shame, and that's why there was so much uproar when they took away that. For some individuals, the more, especially as we start to look at their high school years, if we know the areas that they're in or that they're interested in, we can cater it to that as well. For example, Mark's goal is to work with computers after graduation. Options for employment, full-time, part-time. As some students come out, there's also apprenticeships, self-employment, seasonal employment training programs. This is sometimes what we can do in collaboration with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. I've also put the military as an option for employment. The one thing of caution to note for the military is the only agency that doesn't have to comply with the Disability Rights Act, or ADA. So that's one thing. If an individual with a disability has an interest in joining the military, we really have to begin to do our due diligence and working with a recruiter and, having them look over sort of the records and see what needs to be done. Some individuals with disabilities can be sort of, the military will take their application and they have no problem getting accepted. In others, it all depends on the unique profile of that individual with a disability. Career clusters and pathways. What we want to look at here, these are 16 pathways with job groupings that have similar skill sets, interests, abilities, and activities. Within that they have different subgrouping called pathways. An example of this is the human services pathway. And I just wanted to show you how this works. You might, under the human service pathway, you might have jobs related to early childhood, counseling and mental health, family and community services, personal care services, consumer services as well. Sample employment activities, a variety of different things. And these are the activities that, as we meet as an IEP team, we're going to start building in that transition grid. Sometimes it's particular assessments that somebody might want to look at or utilize. Looking at career exploration, building that career portfolio, touring a CTE program, job fairs, guest speakers. For some of our students, it's going out into the workplace and doing those community visits, field trips, in terms of touring local employers, factories, doing a research paper, a research project on a career of interest, looking at employment ads, interview skills, employability skills. So as we start to look at things, these are things that we're starting to working to build up, with our teams, starting when the student first becomes a transition age to all the way to they exit. Generally speaking, in the earlier years, we're more focused on a career awareness. That's that interest, those preferences, finding out jobs in the community, really by the time a student gets ready to exit, where we've done a lot of that career exploration, that assessment, looking at some of those things from an assessment standpoint that they do really well within a job setting, a job environment, all the way to looking at the skills that they might have when they're leaving, if they've gone through a tech school or another training program, so that we've defined that over a period of time as well. So there's lots of things that can be done. It's really, as a team, starting that process in a coordinated set. And through this coordinated set, what it would look like is by when a student is in 7th grade, they might do the interest inventory. By the time they get to be that senior, we don't want to be doing an interest inventory again. We really want to be putting the finalizations on that plan. Some of our activities could be preparing for employment, communication skills, or decision-making skills as we talk, handling conflict, following directions, getting along. So some of these activities could be things that we're also bringing in to have our students work through as part of an activity, getting them used to decision-making as well. Those interpersonal skills, preparing for employment skills could be part of an activity. This is where sometimes our related services come in with speech, OT, and some of our different types of things as part of skills and activities as well. This is where talking about those work-based learning experiences can become really beneficial as part of an activity, as part of that employment, part of the grid. OVR, opening up a case, making a referral. So as we look at the employment grid, here's our transition grid. This is where the goal would go. A student has an employment goal of competitive employment. A student has upon graduation, a student has a goal of competitive employment in the area of. This is where we're going to put the courses of study for this year and possibly next, depending on when the IEP is written. These are when we're going to put in our list of services and activities. The services are our IEP goals that we're working on, the goals that we're developing and we're progress monitoring. The activities are the various things that we're going to do at each point, grade level wise or IEP year wise for the student as it relates to employment. And this is where we want to look in the various things related to that 339 plan for some of our individuals or some of our students that they're going to be doing. These are things that they might be at each grade, that there might be activities that they're doing through the guidance office as part of employment, education, and training as well. So as we look next is that education and training. When we talk about training is the process of learning something with a goal of performing a specific skill or behavior. Education is that systematic process of acquiring knowledge. So for some of our students, this is where we can do, as we look at planning for post-secondary, do they need a training program? Do they need a 2 or 4 year degree? Training programs usually are shorter term in duration, narrower scope. They might be things such as someone who wants to become an EMT, someone who wants to learn to operate a particular piece of heavy machinery, someone who wants to learn to participate in a 6 to 9 month apprenticeship program. Education, this is more your pursuit of knowledge. This is more your degree seeking program at a college or a university. Various training educational opportunities, on-the-job training, workforce training programs, certification programs, technical schools, apprenticeships, community college programs, 2 to 4 year. So there's a lot of different options for training, from education and training within the community as well. Also, the number of courses that have shot up and the availability of things on the that are being able to be done virtually through the computer. For anybody who has a CareerLink account, I should have added this. There's a platform that they call Metrics Learning. It's called Skill Up, that offers a variety of course modules that they can do to enhance a resume, career workforce, especially for anybody who's graduated. It's something that can be done if you have a CareerLink account. Sample modules might be, for example, in terms of skills, could be how to use a database, or how to use QuickBooks, or how to become HIPAA compliant if you're applying for a job in a medical office building. The other thing that's really nice about the Skill Up modules is for people who've graduated and are seeking a job, and if they have a CareerLink account, and I should have started CareerLink's a state agency that's in Norristown that helps people find employment, is that OSHA 10's available online through Skill Up. Post-secondary education and training goals. This is where we're looking at what's their goal. For some students, it might be to attend that post-secondary comprehensive transition program. It might be a 2-year college or a 4-year college. It might be an employment training program in a particular area. It might be to attend a nursing school. For some of our students who don't want to go to future education or training, it's going to be on-the-job training would be their outcome. Even though you're going straight to the workforce, most jobs require some sort of education or training on the job today. And that could even be OSHA 10, CPR, Safe Serve, or Serve Safe, food handling courses, CPR, first aid. For some, it's machinery, those type of things. For some jobs, it's you're on the job training. In our area, you're going to start to see more and more of warehouses, and especially in the Souderton area, they're already starting to appear. So your on-the-job training could be literally to become certified how to use a forklift, for example. So those are all things as we look to planning for college. Is it a degree granting or certificate, residential or commuter, or virtual? Now even there's degrees where you can do it virtually, the entire 2 or 4 year program online, distance from home, size, curriculum of interest, the quality of disability services or specialized programs that exist on the campus. Not all campuses are created equally, or more campuses now. Some have the post-secondary comprehensive transition programs. Some have the programs for students with autism. One thing to keep in mind as things come in a post-secondary setting, keep in mind the cost. One of the things that you'll find out with colleges is nothing comes for free. So a lot of the programs will have cost. Some of those costs can, for some students who qualify and have waiver services, for example, can be covered by waiver services. Here's just a link for all those different post-secondary comprehensive transition programs for students with intellectual disabilities. Here's some of our students with autism. Chestnut Hill has a newer program for students with autism, the Neurodiversity Initiative. Here's some of our state schools. Westchester, for a really long time, has been doing a lot of different programming for students with autism as well. That's not far. Kutztown as well. So as we look at sample post-secondary transition education and activities, begin to think about research post-secondary options, college fairs, tours, workshops, research training programs. This is where, if we know their employment outcome and what their employment goal, this is where we can help a student begin to look at sort of what are the requirements, what are the things, what are the activities that we need to help them with. For some students, if it's college, this could be your executive skills or your study skills. This is where we begin to expose them to self-practice, self-advocacy, disclosure about contacting the disability services, to learn about their accommodations and what they are, and how to use them and how to request them. Information on PSAT, SAT, time management, practicing disability disclosure. For our students who are college bound, and there was a couple questions on the sheet, the registration, this is one of the most important things. When students go to a college campus, they have to disclose. There's no child fine. So they're the ones who have to make an appointment with the Disability Services Office and, collect the paperwork that's required. The dominant piece of paperwork that's required is going to be actually the RR, because that's confirmation of the disability, not the IEP. The RR is the one that gives a lot of the information. The IEP will also sometimes be requested. And what they're going to be looking at is what accommodations are needed. Other disability categories might have additional paperwork. If you have a student who has ADD or ADHD, for example, they might request a doctor's note. If you have a student who has a hearing loss, you're probably going to have a request for an audiogram from an audiologist, for example, as well. So this is where, as we begin to identify, these are the things and the activities and the steps that can be put in place to look at. Through other activities, this is where we can assess the readiness for college. What areas are they strong at? What are the areas that, from an academic standpoint, do they still need work on? As we look at those type of things. Additional education and training activities. Identify the community rehabilitation providers, identify career and adult learning opportunities, identify certification or credential programs for a career pathway. For some of our students, looking at even, there is an adult search program out at Mainline Hospital on the main line, looking at those type of different programs as well. As we look over the course of time, one of the things, and I put this slide in for you as parents, one of the things that really to start thinking about is how we can help, and as a parent and also school working with collaboratively, how can we build and create a skills portfolio or a profile? Things that we can start to have them, learn and be able to work on. CPR, first aid, child development, customer service, computer and technical skills, different things that might be offered in school and sort of some of those elective classes. Even looking at a lot of jobs, if you look now, even how communication, answering the phones, how to use the internet, Zoom, Teams, those platforms, not only for work, but also for the interviewing process as well. As we look now, more and more educational training programs, there's a requirement that some of the coursework, part of it is done online. So becoming familiar with that as well. But the more and more that we can develop that skills profile is going to help as well. Again, some different things, assessments here for post-secondary education checklist. There's an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school checklist that really helps us look at some of the steps that we need to look at along the way to help prepare for those education and training and college programs. Landmark College Readiness is an assessment that looks at some of the areas to help schools and parents assess the college students' readiness in some areas. It's something that if your son or daughter is considering college, it's something I would look at, especially if your son or daughter has a learning disability, autism, or ADD or ADHD. High school versus college, understanding the difference. And this is one of the worksheets that I'll include when I send to Sandy and Reba to send out is, that the differences between high school and college. I covered a lot between the entitlement, the eligibility, the accommodations, and the modifications as relates to the expectations. Because there were a few questions about college and accommodations and IEPs and RRs, one of the things that I looked at here was I included information that will be in the PowerPoint about general determining reasonable accommodations. What we're looking at for a college is essentially they're looking at leveling the playing field, creating access. What are the accommodations that a student needs based on the known disability that related to its impact on their documented disability? So what it's saying is you have to have evidence that you have to have a disability first. You have to show evidence that your disability affects a particular academic subject or area. Or in some cases, it could be even on-campus activities or living in the dorm, for example, for our students who are blind or visually impaired. For example, where it has to show that it impacts, you could have a math disability, but if it doesn't constitute, if you don't have a reading disability, you might not get extended test time in a class that doesn't involve math. So within that accommodations, we're going to work with you. It's not all encompassing, sort of like the IEP is. The disability goes to the impact as it relates to the course, as it relates to the assignments in the course, that in the most important factors, it's not changing the expectation of what's to be learned in the course. So you might have, if you qualify for extended test time, you're still responsible for taking the entirety of the exam, but you're not going to get a shorter exam. You're not going to get less questions, those type of things. And that's really some of the key things as we talk about accommodations and making our students aware of what they're going to be eligible for. And that's one of the key reasons why I started talking about rating supports at the beginning of the presentation. Again, I talked more, accommodations are looking at the barriers, how possible accommodations might reduce those barriers, whether it's essential or not. Is it qualified? And then here are some of a lot of times they'll do an analysis. Does the accommodation not fundamentally alter the nature of the program or activity? Does it not alter or remove requirements? Does it not lower standards? Does it not present an undue financial administrative burden on the university? Does it not pose a threat to safety, to the safety of others or the public? Again, so as we look at preparing for college, we're going to look at that goal. We're going to look at the services and the activities. And again, and this is where you're going to meet as a team and discuss what are the activities. For some, it's going to be college exploration, tours. For others, it might be if the student has a goal of attending college, it might be looking at study skills or the executive skills in the instruction. It might be the communication part. It might be the self-advocacy part. It might be the disability disclosure. So what we want to look at is when we do all that assessment in the present level of the IEP related to academic performance and functional performance, when we generate those needs, that's a lot of the information that can drive some of the activities in this section. Some of the key things here, looking at dates, test taking skills is huge. Study skills can be huge. The executive skills, organization, planning, time management, those are really, really important skills. Anything else that relates to fostering independence as well. Looking independent living, we want to look at, here are some of those considerations: activities of daily living, technology, communication, financial literacy, health and wellness, recreation, transportation. Transportation's a big one. Give me a 30 seconds and I'll cover that as well. One of the things too for independent living that you want to really touch upon is if your son or daughter or child has an assistive tech device and any apps, we want to make sure that there's a plan for that, and either phasing out that or talking with an insurance provider to assume responsibility and try to get coverage to payment for some of those apps or devices. A lot of times it's the apps that's actually more expensive than the device, so that we can continue and help that student. Again, some of the other things, looking at establishing a plan, financial literacy can become one. There's an activity I forgot to put here. Safe use or digital citizenship can be another really powerful activity as well. So these are things where for some students who need a goal in independent living, not every student might not need one, but for some who do, what are the things that we need to cover or we want to work collaboratively with the school district on as part of the IEP plan to develop or to go over as part of an activity each year. Here's some sample goals, some independent, some with family, some with a supported arrangement. Some students might not need goals. Here's some different sample living activities. This is where we look at those things and build that grid. What does the student need? What are the activities that we are really going to need to drive for, the ones that are going to be the biggest bang for the buck as part of that transition plan? Transportation is one that we often talk about. We know that transportation barriers can affect or have disproportionately affect individuals with disabilities. So we want to expose to transportation planning and having an understanding of different things and, looking at that. So not only is transportation planning just being able to drive, but also for some students, what are the transportation resources available in the community? Is there a bus system? Is there a train? What are the various options? Uber, Lyft, those type of things. A school's not going to probably sponsor an Uber or Lyft, but making a student aware of the skills that go into transportation and understanding that. As we talk about transportation, there's academic skills, there's communication involved, there's safety. That's one of the nice things now that in terms of Uber that you can, you know, there's different systems now for establishing a relationship or, you know, in terms of communication with that. Critical thinking, identifying interpersonal skills. You know, for some of our students who might have to ride public transportation, you know, how to sit, how to talk. You know, if you're riding a bus, what sort of the unwritten rules of the bus or the train? Relevant laws in terms of, you know, for SEPTA and, you know, to get a discounted pass as an individual with disability. And, you know, that financial part of understanding transportation. As we look at the cost of even owning a car, that I'm learning from my own son, as he drives his small little radius of about a mile a day. A car is an expensive proposition. The insurance for a young adult under the age of 25 is certainly an expensive proposition today. Responsibilities, looking at what's available. Some resources as well. The planning for the future checklist can be sort of a guide. And this is some of the things that we were talking earlier, Sandy, about in some of the questions. It gives some different benchmarks, some of the skills at each age of transition as well. And some of the different associated agencies. For some reason, my hyperlink didn't show up. I'll correct that. PA Secondary Transition is our secondary transition website, has a lot of different resources for parents. What you'll see when I send out, and on this link, on the PowerPoint, you can connect to it, is this will link you to one page, about 10 one-page secondary transition pages on employment, work, personal finance, financial planning, benefits consulting, as it relates to transition planning as well. Different resources. We do a resource expo each year where we have the Office of Developmental Disabilities, education and training partners, employment, mental health, financial resources. At that resource expo, resources on power of attorney and guardianship as well. Agency involvement, and this is where going back to a question earlier, making sure that we connect early on in the process, or even, you know, if we have a son or a daughter with an intellectual disability or autism, that we're reaching out and making that initial connection with the Office of Developmental Disability. And that can be done as early as 5, 6, 7, just so that you can begin to establish that relationship. Here are some different links and resources as well that can be incorporated as part, depending on the needs, sometimes as even activities for some of our students and families as well. Again, some state resources, some mental health resources, financial. I see there's some questions, so I'm going to stop. So, yes, on a quarterly basis, I do a transition coordinating council where I give updates and I'll provide a lot of different information. We have different resources and speakers and presenters. I'll also include the dates on, well, I'll put a slide on that for the present on the PowerPoint as well when I send the updated one to you, Sandy, as well. There's also sometimes within your local special education in the community, we have a state task force that does a lot of different events as well, and can provide a lot of great information. The other thing is collaborate with some of our neighboring school districts. For an example, Spring Forward usually has a resource event as well. And really one of the things that I really encourage, not knowing where everyone's at in the transition process, the more knowledge you have, the more power you have. And you know, developing those relationships and those connections. So that's what I have. If there's questions, you know, feel free to put questions in the chat box, and we've got a couple minutes and I'll try to respond. Again,
Chris, Sandy had asked the question about an annotated transition grid. I know that Patan has a annotated IEP. I don't
Okay.
know if they specifically have just the transition grid pulled out of that. I just tried to pull it up online, Sandy, and it's coming up as like a Chromebook extension. So it's a PDF. So I'm trying to copy it into the chat and I don't know if it's going to work, but Patan does have an annotated IEP and there is a whole transition piece in there. So I'm not sure if that's what you were looking for. But I can put that in there for you.
The annotated IEP will give you some of the parts, services, activities, and it can be used as a part. In terms of what I think you're looking for is, if you're looking for an exact timeline, it's not sort of that because it becomes more case by case. But there's different things that planning for the future will drive some of the things. The district's 339 plan will give you a great starting point for different things too, from a grade level perspective, because there's different things that are done each year. The other thing to look at is some disability specific groups also have some different things based on grade span, and I will incorporate those resources in as well.
Thank you both.
Yes. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? All right. With that, I'm going to close out the meeting if we're all done. Are we all done?
I need Sandy, I need you for 1 second because I've got a couple of notes as I was presenting. I just want to make sure I get everything I owe you real quick.
Do you mean like on the Zoom? Like,
Yeah, keep the Zoom open.
yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. Just so everybody knows, we have the PA Inclusion Collectives partnership with Peel. Their series in February with Eric Carter will be from, excuse me, Barriers to Belonging, the Power of Peers in Inclusive Schools. And that's Tuesdays in February 6th, 13th, and 20th, 6 to 8 on Zoom. Check out our Facebook or your inbox for details and registration. And besides that, thanks for coming. And we hope you enjoyed the presentation. And thank you, Chris, and thank you, Nikki, for coming too.